This podcast is produced by My Podcast Pal. For help with your podcast, check out mypodcastpal.com. Hey guys, thanks for following Weekly Cannabis Update. We search the internet for cannabis-related news so that you don't have to. Okay, in this report, cannabis and sex. Yep, I thought I might start this one off with something that would grab your attention. Medicinal marijuana guidelines, and who makes them anyway? Apparently you're not hip anymore unless you're old. And if you invest in real estate, you might like pot. And many more stories. My name is Michael Peterson, and this is your weekly cannabis update. Alrighty then, cannabis and sex. What's the connection? That was the title of an article published on Modern Leaf, who call themselves your cannabis mentor. In it, they say that while cannabis has a reputation for causing low sperm counts and even creating lazy lovers, history proves otherwise. Cannabis is claimed to have been used in tantric sex in India as far back as 1700 BC, and it was said to create warm and pleasurable sensations. In the 1800s, a British doctor, Sir William O'Shaughnessy, wrote that cannabis was an intense aphrodisiac. At a basic level, cannabinoids, or CBD, is said to increase blood flow. The article says that when THC is mixed in, it relaxes adults, essentially putting them in the mood. Recently, a study in the U.S. asked 51,000 adults how often they had sex in the 4 weeks prior to the survey. Women who said that they ingest cannabis averaged 7.1 encounters, while non-imbibing women averaged 6. Men were 6.9 times for those who used cannabis and 5.6 for those who didn't. The article went on to call cannabis the female Viagra, enhancing their experience in particular with the big O. And those are their words, not mine, although I can't deny I enjoy reading them. As you know, laws pertaining to cannabis legalization are being hammered out at various levels of government, but it's the Canadian medical community that's trying to figure out just what dosage should be prescribed for what product and ailment. According to Global News, a document called the Simplified Guideline for Prescribing Medicinal Cannabinoids in Primary Care was published just last week. The document claims that there is limited evidence to support the reported benefits of cannabis for many conditions. The intention of the document is to clarify the benefits of medicinal marijuana products for both doctors and patients. The doctors who published the document did say, though, that they don't want the document to be seen as something that will force other doctors to prescribe in a certain way for their patients. There are claims that cannabis can help with pain, but can't yet be directed to a particular area of the body, like, for example, the back. And they say that they're certain that cannabis isn't effective with acute pain for, say, a broken leg, for example. So it seems like the doctors who did the study then created this document are providing their medical perspective, but not suggesting that there's hard medical evidence to back up that perspective. I'm not actually sure that this is news or surprising, but an article on RT.com claims that cannabis sales in Aspen, Colorado now outpace alcohol sales. Apparently, Aspen earned $11.3 million in revenue from cannabis compared to $10.5 million in alcohol sales in 2017. And cannabis sales were up 16% from 2016. A study last year published by Georgia State University showed that there's a 15% decrease in liquor sales in U.S. states that legalize cannabis sales. The study also showed, and now this is interesting, that alcohol and cannabis sales are strong substitutes for each other. So rather than cannabis exacerbating alcoholism or things like drunk driving, cannabis actually helps temper those things, according to the study. Speaking of regulated cannabis consumption, another story published by Global News claims that a U.S. study shows that consumers there prefer cannabis products that are lighter or lower in dose. The idea behind this is that consumers seem to prefer low doses for treating pain and going about their daily lives over trying to achieve a psychoactive effect, or in layman's terms, trying to get high. The study showed that a lot of new cannabis users are also being cautious in going after products with lower doses of THC. This goes against the gray or black market trend over the last few decades of trying to increase potency. The article also says that a lot of older consumers are interested in cannabis that's similar in strength to the stuff that they were used to growing up. Now, studies on edibles in the US show that 20% of consumers are buying products with 5 milligrams of THC and less, while many more are careful to steer away from edibles that are anything over 10 milligrams. Those low dose edible consumers are now being called light frequent flyers. Then there are the microdosers who choose to ingest THC for pain or body maintenance but want to avoid any psychoactive experience. There was a comparison made between low dosage cannabis users and the light beer market. Some people just like to take it easy, I guess. In any case, if you don't already know this, factory made edibles aren't expected in Canada until 2019. I've read this many times before, but this week, theconversation.com published the latest article claiming that real cannabis connoisseurs are turning out to be those between the ages of 45 to 64. In fact, this age range spends the highest proportion of household earnings on weed, and most of it, according to this article, is spent on recreational rather than medicinal too. This trend seems to be happening all over the world as well. Between 2004 and 2013, cannabis use doubled in Australia in those studied over 50 years old. The article claims that in the UK, cannabis consumers between the ages of 65 to 74 years consume 7 times more cannabis on average from between the year 2000 to the year 2014. Since the elderly are more likely taking a wide range of other medications, though, doctors are concerned about how cannabis will interact and, of course, any cardiovascular risks associated with smoking anything. The article ends by saying that although there are concerns by healthcare practitioners, the obvious benefits like pain relief are more tangible for the elderly than most medical studies on the subject, as the opinions of most doctors is speculation at best. An article published by the Financial Post claims that Canada's cannabis industry is expected to grow 5 times larger in the next 2 years, which means that it'll have a dramatic effect on Canada's real estate landscape as well. The article says that Canada's 8 largest legal producers will need upwards of 8 million square feet of space by 2020. That roughly matches the total size of Amazon's headquarters in Seattle, which also employs upwards of 40,000 workers. What's referred to as the industrial property vacancy rate was just 3.9% in 2017, which is the lowest it's been since 2001. And rental prices on industrial properties raised by 15% in Vancouver and over 7% in Toronto last year. In comparison, in Oregon, where cannabis has been legal for a while, companies have paid premiums of up to $18 or more per square foot on industrial space compared to 2016. And in Colorado, growers are faced to pay almost 10 times the going rate on properties. Incidentally, though, in Canada, Aurora's been in the habit of building their own facilities, and Canopy Growth started by taking over abandoned factories, but is now starting to consider their own builds like Aurora to reduce costs. If you're a long-time cannabis user, you've probably been handed a joint rolled by someone else countless times. But how would you feel if you bought a joint from a store or a dispensary and it had mold in it? A dispensary chain in Denver is recalling various marijuana products after it was discovered that they had unhealthy levels of yeast and mold. Apparently, a customer purchased a pre-rolled joint from the dispensary and allegedly became sick from it. So products from 5 different locations are being recalled, but the article didn't mention if the staff had used their own saliva to roll the joints. I'm going to assume not. Kinda gross. An article published on myeden.ca talked about terpenes and suggested that they're responsible for cannabis of the future. Terpenes are something that I'm still learning about myself, so naturally I wanted to learn more. In a nutshell, and I'm quoting from the article here, terpenes are the aromatic oils produced naturally by and all plants. So terpenes create the different flavors of various strains, everything from sweet berry to citrus notes. Instead of implying that it's an indica, and therefore you might feel relaxed, and if it's a sativa, you might become hyperactive. If you're aware of the terpene content of the cannabinoids in the strain, you can more accurately predict the effects. So According to the article, not all terpenes work the same. Some produce feelings of relaxation, and some can positively affect the memory and boost energy. Some terpenes can simply increase the effects of the THC in your cannabis, which I'm assuming means increases the psychoactive qualities. The article goes on to suggest that terpenes can also regulate neurotransmitters like dopamine and serotonin. So basically, it says that terpenes do two main things. They add aroma and flavor to cannabis while enhancing various effects of the cannabis on the consumer. Utilizing terpenes effectively by growers can help define the cannabis plant well beyond simply saying that it's an indica or it's a sativa. With this said, I don't believe that the article really went beyond scratching the surface of what terpenes are, but I think that it's probably inevitable that cannabis, like wine, will develop a protocol for enthusiasts to become experts. Wine has sommeliers, so what will we call the sommeliers of the cannabis world? But I guess it's just a matter of time before someone tries to regulate and certify that role too. In a world of what seems like endless money supplies in the cannabis business, Aphria made an unusual move and cut the amount of cash it put on the table to acquire Nuvera from $1 per share to 60 cents per share. Nuvera, on the other hand, agreed to the reduction, claiming that it needs funding from Aphria to help with their acquisition with a company called Avanti for an estimated $43 million. Share values for both Aphria and Nuvera have dropped since the first deal was announced on January 29th, so that might have something to do with it. Thanks for listening to Weekly Cannabis Update. We search the internet for cannabis-related news so that you don't have to. If you have any questions or comments, or would like us to cover any stories, email us at weeklycannabisupdate@gmail.com. Thanks for listening, and please hit subscribe to this podcast to get your next Weekly Cannabis Update. Weekly Cannabis Update is a regularly published podcast. Our goal is to find cannabis-related news that interests you, summarize it, and retell the stories in a way that appeals to the interests of busy people. We do our very best to remain as accurate as possible, but take no responsibility for inaccurate details or facts. If a story interests you, we're glad to have brought it to your attention, but take the time to research the details for yourself.